Hey students, it's Mr. Little again. Today I'm going to go ahead and give you the oral instructions for your check for understanding for this week. The check for understanding is the same regardless of whether you are in an on-level class or a pre-AP class. But there are a couple things I want to make certain that you do understand on this, because I think there might be something that might be easy for you to miss on this. So pay attention here. Okay, again, we do the check for understanding prior to the quiz. We do the check for understanding after we have looked through the different notes that are available to you. So please don't rush through this. I'm going to be checking this work a little more carefully than I did the first week to make sure that we are hitting the bullseye on our target. So please make sure that you pay attention to the notes, that you're doing everything that is being asked of you. Okay, well, here we go. First things first is that you're going to obviously put your name first and last, and you're going to put your class period, again, just like we do when we're in school. Now the next part says, use the model below to identify the seasons for the northern hemisphere for each location. So we're looking at the northern hemisphere in this particular section. Notice that it says the Earth is divided into two halves by the equator. Each half is called a hemisphere. The hemisphere north of the equator is called the northern hemisphere. Texas is located in the northern hemisphere. The hemisphere south of the equator is called the southern hemisphere. As an example, Australia is located in the southern hemisphere. Notice that in this graphic, it does not show the initials for the southern hemisphere. That's because we're only interested at this point in time to identify what are the seasons in the northern hemisphere. Now, just like the notes indicate, the best thing to do is to take the left or the right image and identify where summer or winter is going to be located. Once you've got that point, then since you know your seasons in order, you just go around it and you can go and fill it in. So once you've identified the season on either side of this graphic as being summer or winter, that could be your starting point, and then you just go in turn through the rest of the images, the rest of the locations. So you're going to fill in for location A, okay, what is the season that's here? What is the season here? What is the season here? And what is the season here? Now, you might be tempted to go ahead and answer with location A first, but I'm telling you, just from history, just from my ability of working with students over the years, it's much, much easier to start with either B or D, because that's going to tell you where your summer or your winter month or your seasons are. So I would definitely start with B or D first and then work round robin to fill in the rest of it. Okay, next one is pretty similar, but in this case it's asking you to use the model to identify the seasons for the southern hemisphere. Okay, so again, we're looking for the southern hemisphere. Up here we were looking at the northern hemisphere. Down here we're looking at the southern hemisphere. So all of this information is exactly the same as it was said earlier. Each half is called a hemisphere. The hemisphere north of the equator is called the northern hemisphere. Texas is located in the northern hemisphere, but the hemisphere south of the equator is called the southern hemisphere, Australia being one example. Interestingly enough, it doesn't show the initials SP for the southern hemisphere here, but notice that that is what we are looking at. We're looking at the bottom half of each of the globes here, each of our Earths. We're interested in the bottom portion, or the southern hemisphere. So just like we did priorly, you want to go ahead and my best advice is figure out the seasons for either B or D, and then work round robin to figure out the rest of the seasons, and then notate it here with each of the various radio buttons. Now on the bottom question, notice that it actually has a larger point accumulation here. It's worth 44 points versus each of the prior questions being worth 28 points. So it's weighted a little more heavily for this, and the reason being is that you have to explain why you choose each season for location A, B, C, and D for the northern hemisphere. Be sure to discuss the tilt of the Earth and the intensity of light for each location. Again, you can find all of this information available to you on the oral lecture. It's in the visual aids. It's in the notes. So there's at least 3 or 4 different sources that you should be able to find this information. I'm especially looking for you to make a very clear, reasoning and explanation as to why you chose each season. Again, since we're in 8th grade, make sure that you are doing it as a complete sentence if you want to get full credit. The more in-depth the answer, the better your grade will be. And again, make sure that you go ahead and click submit when you are finished. I might be able to see that you've been working on it, but I won't be able to grade it until you click the submit button. Okay, so that concludes our season's check for understanding. Have a great day, kids.